We're going to look at the research design, trying to explain what it is. We're going to try to look at the research methodology or the method, also trying to explain what it is. We will look at the measurement criteria, the internal validity threads, the external validity, and the external validity threads. So we'll try to cover that amount of work today. And as I said, I mean, feel free to interject. Please, as we do this session again, make sure that you look at your own proposal. For those of you who already have, proposal on the table, or for those of you who are going to still do a proposal, think about those areas that we are covering and adjust your work accordingly, because it might just as well be that all that is done and what is required is only for you to do some small adjustments. So that's just an appeal on my side as we go along, because it makes it easier when we talk about something that it's relevant to the work that you are doing. Otherwise, it's just one of those conversations that we're going to have, and they are very abstract. They are not relevant to the work that you do. Just by way of just going back a little bit to jog the memory. When we started, some few weeks back, we spoke about the difference between scientific and the non-scientific approaches. We spoke about the non-scientific approach that deals more or focus more on authority, on opinion of your peers, traditions, debating, and accidental observations. So those were the elements or the factors within the non-scientific realm. In the scientific realm, really, which is where you have been and you are at the moment, is that it's basically, looking at systematic observation, control, and replication. So those are the three factors that influence scientific realm. So when we say scientific, we really mean that the observation is systematic, there's control, there is also replication. Now, we just want to remind each other of those principles, because if we don't, then all of a sudden you'll find that you may then get confused about what actually constitutes scientific approach. It's actually, based on the systematic observation, control, and replication. Whilst a non-scientific approach has got authority, opinions, traditions, debates, and accidental observation. We had an example of a case study that we were talking about earlier, and I just want to find out if you are still where you were when we started. The Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, Fraud, and Corruption in the Public Sector, including organs of state, which is colloquially known as the Rotundo Commission. If I were to test us today, and I want to ask, where would you like to place the commission, and why? Is it non-scientific? Is it scientific? Using what you have already learned up to now, where would you wanna place it? And why are you saying that? I mean, surely I expect that the answers may not necessarily be the same, but answers nonetheless. May I check what is your opinion on this? I'm saying where we are now, we have traversed an environment where we're trying to look at the scientific and the non-scientific approaches. And under the non-scientific approaches, we said you'll always find authority, opinions, traditions, debates, and accidental observation. Whilst on the other hand, on the scientific approach, it's based on the systematic observation, control, and replication. Those are the factors that define science. Now, I then say, given what you know now up to this far, where and why, where would you place the Rotundo Commission? It's known as the Rotundo Commission, and I know that it's a commission of inquiry into state capture, fraud, and corruption in the public sector, including organs of state. Where would you want to place it in terms of the non-scientific and the scientific, and why?
I would like to think that it's non-scientific in a sense that there isn't any scientific tool that has been used to, number one, collect those people, get the names of those people who provided evidence, and people provide evidence based on what they think is acceptable. There isn't any form or tool that is used to access such kind of evidence. So it's mostly reliable on the position that you are in at the time and what you think would be solid evidence. That's my take.
Okay.
Initially, I thought it would be non-scientific, but and I think there's an element of both in what had happened in the Zondo Commission, in that through the entire process there was a systematic observation that occurred. However, the opinions of others did come through in the commission as well, but Mr. Zondo himself used a systematic approach or systematic observation as to how to go about getting the people to come and present their cases. I don't know.
Okay.
I would say on my side, I would say that it's non-scientific because, in my opinion, this cannot be precisely replicated in other similar situations. So some people who would have come through did not come through and were able to justify why they shouldn't be there, while others were compelled to. So it's not replicable. That's my piece.
Okay. It's very interesting that already we're picking up, important elements of research. And as you say, there's nothing wrong with having a different opinions on the similar matter. Can I just check by way of a question now, whilst you are pondering your possible answer? What was the hypothesis that needed to be tested? What is it that was meant to be tested? And from where you are, where would you say became the outcome of that hypothesis? There must have been a hypothesis. Now I just want to know where do you think became the outcome of that hypothesis as far as you're concerned?
I would think that the hypothesis perhaps was that there is a relationship between those who were identified to have the relationship with the subjects, and then based on the evidence collected to basically prove then that it is indeed the case that there was a relationship between certain individuals with the basically the propagators of state capture. So the evidence brought forward was basically to either prove or disprove that relationship.
Okay, so from where you are, Ngumalo, is that was the relationship? Did they prove that there is a relationship that exists actually? From where you are,
I haven't pondered on the results of the state capture. However, from the evidence that was given, it appears to some extent that hypothesis was then proved to be the case, that certain individuals had indeed a relationship with the orchestrators of the state capture.
okay. Yeah, I can test the cautiousness of your of your answer on this, but there was a hypothesis, and there is a link between the hypothesis and the outcome, because remember it was about fraud, corruption, and maladministration. So there is some sense that there is a relationship, right? We can We can at least agree on that. Angela, what do you have to say? The hypothesis was that there is corruption, maladministration, and fraud that is happening in the public service, or that happened in the public service, including those organs of state. The outcome of all this work, in terms of the hypothesis, where would you place the outcome without being specific and really being accurate from where you are? Because I would imagine you might not have followed everything up to the T. What would be your sense, Angela?
I would say that the hypothesis was whether corruption had taken place and whether our state has been captured. And I think, just very generally, I think to a degree it has been confirmed that corruption has taken place and that our state has been captured, without going into further detail. That's my piece.
Okay, thanks. I think basically what we wanted was just to see whether there has been any form of a hypothesis. And yes, I mean, you don't have to go into details because you don't have the data, other than just the general public comments that we all get subjected to. But I'm actually a bit concerned about the level of non-participation by those that are on the platform, other than those that have made comments, because it might be that we are looking for, a facilitation, and a facilitation becomes more effective when we all participate, particularly on general comments that are helping other students. Because I think if UNISA was looking for a teacher or a lecturer, they would have just taken amongst themselves. So they are looking for a facilitator. So I want to hear from Letuktula and Leanne. I know now she has, because we also want to know if people are experiencing technical challenges. So it helps so that we don't lose or we don't leave anyone behind. So please, those of you who have not made any kind of comment, we welcome that you do so, because it helps to just pick up where you are. Otherwise, there will be no point in proceeding when people are not either hearing us or they are not able to follow the engagement. But I see people come in and they leave, so it might be that there are some technical glitches that we need to be aware of, because then it will make us. Let me hear from, is it Coley Mary? Before some of you get lost in the midst of a research proposal and you want to know where we are at the stage where let's just say in terms of the process or the step, we are still at step 4. So there's a lot that happens at this step, because this is where you have to come up with a research design. We've done literature, we've sorted out the aims, and we've discussed the topic. So assuming now you've got your topic, you've done your literature, you've got your hypothesis or your assumptions, we are now still dealing with issues around the research design. So the question then is, what is the research design? A research design is a blueprint or a detailed plan on how a research study will be measured. It is a general strategy for solving a problem, a research problem. A research design provides an overall structure for the procedures that you will follow as a researcher, the data that you will collect, and the analysis of that data that you shall conduct. So basically, in a plan, in a design, we like to see the procedures that you are going to follow. We like to see the kind of data that you are going to collect, and we like to understand how you are going to do an analysis. So it's basically, when we put it in a simpler way, a research design is planning. So you're planning, this is how I'm going to conduct, I'm going to collect data. This is the procedure that I'm going to follow. And this is how I'm going to analyze the data that I shall have collected. So research design is exactly that. What then is the research methodology? A methodology is the way of thinking about and studying social phenomenon. Now, in a research methodology is the general approach that you take in carrying out the research project. The approach dictates the particular tools for the researcher to select. So it is the technique that you use to collect and analyze data. Whilst the other one is a procedure on the how you're going to collect and analyze. This one is more the technique on the collection and the analysis of data. The data and methodology are inextricably intertwined. Now, a methodology chosen must consider the nature of the data that will be collected in the resolution of the problem. So the other one is the plan, the other one is the technique. So the research design is the plan, and the methodology is the technique that you're going to use to collect and analyze data. So the procedure on the data that you're going to collect, the analysis that you're going to conduct on how you're going to do it is the design. But the technique of collecting and the technique of analyzing is the methodology. Now, previously we spoke about sampling, and we're bringing it here because it's still relevant for you to understand that what a representative sample is all about. A representative sample is a sample that reflects the population accurately. So again, we want to repeat this principle so that as you get into your design, you make a determination of whether or not you're looking for a representative sample or not. Now, when the sample reflects the population accurately, you have achieved the representative sample. Now, why is that important? In other words, it's important if you want to be able to generalize findings to the whole population. If you want to do that, you make sure that the sample must be representative of the population. A sample is a representative of the population from which it is selected if the aggregate characteristics of the sample closely approximate those same aggregate characteristics in the population. It's a quality of a sample of having the same distribution of characteristics as the population from which it was selected. By implication, by description and explanation derived from an analysis of the sample may be assumed to represent similar ones in the population. It's important to understand what is the intention of a representative sample, because representativeness is enhanced by probability sampling, and it provides for generalizability and use of inferential statistics. So if your intention is to generalize your findings to the whole population, then you have to consider using a representative sample. You're going to meet all this as we get along on this discussion, but it's important for you to understand what a representative sample is meant to do. Now, let's then move and discuss the three measurement criteria. Those three measurement criteria, in other words, those that are scientific based, are more validity, reliability, and reproducibility or replicability. So these are the three measurement criteria that apply in research: validity, reliability, and reproducibility or replicability. May I just then pause here and check if there's anything or any comment that some of you would like to engage us on in relation to what we've just spoken about now. Research design, research methodology, the measurements, which are your validity, replicability, reproducibility, thus far, or the representative sample. Is there anything that is of interest to you, or may I just find out from you, how did you deal with any of those, if you have dealt with them, or what is your overall appreciation of what you've already dealt with?
So it's more, I think, more of a question than anything else, than a comment. So if you're doing a desktop, if you're doing desktop research and you've got to do sampling, I'm struggling to figure out how that will work if it's a desktop research that you've got to follow. So
when you do a desktop research,
yeah,
are you doing it based on literature only?
on literature only, yes.
So you've got, that's qualitative, am I right? Or is it quantitative?
Well,
Does the number of sources matter or not?
I think, yes, it does matter. So it's quantitative.
So when you do it, when you do the desktop,
Right.
you are doing desktop based on a particular, you are really just taking to a particular problem that you like to
Investigate. Yes.
Yeah, to investigate. So you have chosen to go for a literature because you've got reasons why you are doing it that way. What are those considerations?
So I think because it's quite a vast research that needs that I'm attempting to do, and so it just doesn't I think going based on the literature on what others have brought to the table already would just make better sense to configure or to base my research on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying, then you should have a plan where you then say, remember research design. Okay. Can we talk about the research design, the methodology at least? The research design, remember, is the planning, is the
Yes.
plan. So you have got a plan that says you are going to conduct literature and you will then have a sense of how much and how broad or how many of the sources you will consult. So it's more qualitative than so the number of sources doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're investigating a problem and you've got sources that you're going to. So you're not going to interview anyone. You're not going to administer any questionnaire. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
So repeat your question then. Now we know for a fact that you are going to do desktop, but you're mainly just going to look at literature.
Yes.
Most possibly the latest literature in the market or in the industry or in the field.
Mm-hmm.
So now you do it and you've got some literature and you don't have to do any other way of corroborating evidence or sources. You just rely on literature sources, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So repeat your question because we're going to talk to validity, reliability, and replicability just now.
Okay, so the question was, when you're doing desktop research, how do you collect your samples?
Yeah, it may not be necessary to have a sample other than literature relating to your key concept, because when you do literature, you're going to look at literature that has got any relevance to what you are investigating, isn't it?
That's correct.
So initially, you wouldn't know how much have been studied in the area that you are studying. So as you get in, then you realize how much journals, books, and so on are there. So all what you're interested in is the sample size here doesn't really matter. What matters here is what you are looking for, because you are not doing quantitative, you're doing qualitative.
Qualitative, okay.
Yeah. So the size of sources, as I was saying, depending on how much they want. If 10, 100, 2,000 sources or 200 sources is sufficient, you're just going to reach a point where you say, okay, I think I've got enough sources from where I can start drawing my literature and doing my literature. Because all what you're doing is that you're doing literature review. So everything else is just about the relevance of the literature to what you are investigating. So the sample size really is not a factor.
Okay, perfect. That clarifies it. Thank you very much, Prof.
You're welcome. Any other reflection from you, Mashudu, on the discussion that we have just had, or the discussion that we are going to go into? However, Sam, you just need to still remember these other principles that you are going to talk to so that you are able to reflect them in your desktop research because they are important. Let's look at validity. Of course, validity in this context does not carry the same connotation in qualitative research that it does in quantitative research. So the connotations of validity in quantitative and qualitative research is not the same, nor is it a companion to reliability or generalizability. So you need to understand validity in its context. So when somebody talks about validity, and that is in a qualitative research, it doesn't have the same connotations as it will in quantitative research. So validity refers to the extent to which an empirical measure adequately reflects the real meaning of the concept under consideration. So it describes a measure that accurately reflects the concept it is intended to measure. So in other words, in the literature review, Sam, if we just allow us to use your example, you will still be required to measure what you need to measure in the literature review. So when you look at the literature review, you are going to look at exactly what is it that you are going to investigate, nothing else. Because at times when you go through the stuff, then you start looking at other things and you veer off from what you are then meant to measure. So validity, it describes a measure that accurately reflects the concept it is intended to measure. So if in your literature review, you are looking at a particular phenomenon, that's all that literature review is going to focus on. There are two types of threats to validity. So in other words, it's almost like I'm measuring this and nothing else, you know. So all what your investigation is going to be, it's always only going to be on those that factors or phenomenon that you need to measure and nothing else. So once you do that, your study will then have reached a certain level of validity. Well, we say it's valid, but it's not as valid as in the non-technical way. So there are two types of threats to validity, because there are actually two types of validity, internal and external validity. But both of them have got two types of threats. We will discuss those just now. What then is another principle is reliability. Remember, reliability is another measure, is another criteria for measurement. We said there's three: is validity, is reliability, and is reproducibility. Now, when you talk reliability here, we refer to the consistency or the stability of the results of an experiment. If every day when you test something, you get the same results over and over, that's reliability. But the fact that you are testing that which you are testing is validity. So every day you see people going to the Gautrain at a certain time. You need to know they are going at a certain time. Every day you measure that. You need to then be able to say you are not measuring the fact that they are going to Gautrain. That's reliability when you see it consistently happening. So consistency or stability of the results of an experiment means reliability. So reliability generally refers to the consistency of a measurement, that is whether repeated measurement of the same object or the same phenomenon provide consistent, stable result. So you don't say to someone, well, I've noticed the fact that you are doing this repeatedly when you mean perhaps once or twice. So here when you talk about reliability, we mean consistency of a measurement. So when it's been done over and over and you get same results over and over as you measure, that then becomes reliability because it's consistent and it is stable. So consistency is a necessary condition for internal validity, but not a sufficient condition. So if you test something over and over and you get the same results as your tests, that then gives you internal validity. So you can tell me that, look, without any doubt, if you do this and you do it over and over again, this is what you will get as the result. That's reliability. So reliability of an experiment is set to increase if the experiment is repeated and consistent results are obtained. So if I get same results consistently and repeatedly when I do that experiment, then I'm achieving reliability. The consistency or repeatability of an instrument. So I use the same instrument, I test the same phenomenon, measure the same kind of a variable, I should then be able to get the same result. So scores to items on an instrument are internally consistent. That is, there are items responses consistent across constructs. Am I getting the same consistent results? Are they stable over time? In other words, when I test now and I come back and retest, is there retest correlations? Whether there was consistency in test administration and scoring. So when I test now and I come back and I retest, I should then be able to get same consistent stable result. So reliability, ladies and gentlemen, is a matter of whether a particular technique applied repeatedly to the same object yield the same results each time. So in other words, there must be no doubt that when I do that, I apply this technique and I do it repeatedly to the same object, I need to get same results each time. If I get different results each time, it then talks to whether or not there's reliability of that measurement or not. The third measure criteria is reproducibility or replicability. These are scientific criterion that must be applied in most, if not all, research projects. Replicability refers to the ability of others to replicate one's findings. So in other words, if I follow your design, I go through your methods, do as you have done, I should be able to replicate your findings. So reproducibility means repeating a study and checking to see whether the same results are produced each time. So if I follow, as I said, if I follow same study and I go the same sample size and do as you've done, apply the same techniques, I should produce same results. So this is extremely important criterion in empirical science, since unless other scientists are able to repeat one's measurement and obtain similar results, the result would not be accepted by the scientific community. So if I put together a commission and I come to the different conclusion, it might then talk to replicability principle or measurement. So in the scientific community, it is not acceptable to produce different results, but having followed same design and methodology, unless if there are issues that we'll talk to just now, which are internal validity threats. So ideally, when I follow everything to the latter, the results must still be the same. So any other researcher following that process should be able to produce the same results. So reproducibility deals with the reproductions of research findings of others. So I'm able to corroborate your research findings because I'm just following the process that you have followed. So for replication to take place, a study must be capable of replication. It must be replicable. So replication really, ladies and gentlemen, safeguards researchers against overgeneralization. So these are the three principles or three measurement criteria that we can talk about before we talk about internal validity. So it's validity, it's reliability, and it is reproducibility. In validity, you measure that which you need to measure. In reliability is the consistency of the stability of the measurement. And in replication is the ability to reproduce the same results as they might have been produced by others. So those are important principles or measurement criteria in research. Any engagement thus far? These are very important in your design, because if you design it in such a way that I can follow your proposal, I should be able to produce same result. If I don't, it doesn't mean you have failed. We will deal with that just now. If I do what you've done and I'm unable to produce the same result. So in other words, I'm unable to get, to replicate the results. We can explain that just in a moment. But before we do so, I thought let's pause here and talk a little bit more of these 3 measurement criteria. Any reflection so far? I don't want us to move too fast and leave everybody behind, because it's important that we understand this principle.
In terms of validity, I think let's wait for internal and external before I can ask questions, because I think maybe I'm jumping the gun. I wanted to.
No, please ask the question. It's the question that helps.
Yeah, the issue, this the last 2, they are clear, but in terms of validity, yeah, that's why I'm saying let me wait for internal and external.
What is your question in terms of validity? Ask the question. What you don't understand, it's fine.
Valid okay, the results are valid in terms of generally, or in terms of what?
Okay, let's use an example of what you are studying at the moment, Edward.
Okay.
What is it that you want to study? Let's use that example, because it might be understandable in context. I want us to have that. What is your focus at the moment?
Gender equality at senior level.
So what do you want to achieve? What do you want to measure?
Why?
Or what are you trying to establish?
Why women are underrepresented at senior level, CEOs?
Why what?
Why women are lacking at senior management level? Usually men are overrepresented at senior level, but women are lacking.
Okay, I think we need to go back and operationalize. I hope you don't mind. We're going to use you as an example.
Okay.
I don't understand when you say why women are lacking. What is your...
Yeah, because in my department, most of senior managers are men.
I understand that.
So
but listen to my challenge here. I'm saying when you say lacking,
I want to find out why women are lacking at senior level. What is the problem?
Yeah, but listen to my question. Okay. I'm saying the word, the concept lacking, right?
Okay.
Well, how do you define operationally lacking?
They are less.
Because I said you're saying they're the women under represented.
Yes.
So when you say the women are lacking, right? What is your understanding of that lacking part?
Women are not equal with men in terms at senior management level. They are less represented in terms of numbers.
So why don't you say that? Why don't you then say you want to establish?
Okay.
Basically, you want to know the reasons why women are less represented in senior positions in, say, your company, right?
Yes, sir.
So did you get the difference now?
Yes. No, thanks very much.
So because when you say they are lacking, I would say there's nothing wrong with the word lacking, because they might be lacking, but I think what you're saying is that there's women and men in your company, right?
Yes.
But your assumption is that there's more men in senior management positions than women.
Yes. That's my assumption.
Yeah, so you're making that assumption that by numbers, the sheer numbers, you think there are more men than women. Now, your focus is on senior management positions, right?
Exactly, sir.
We're trying to follow your topic. Now we then say, okay, there's women, there's men, in senior positions. So my understanding then is that there will be women in senior management positions. The only thing is that they are not represented in the way that they are underrepresented.
Yes, sir.
Now, the validity then, what are you going to measure? You're going to measure what? Remember, validity is about what you are meant to measure.
Okay.
You're going to measure the numbers of women in senior positions as opposed to number of men.
Okay.
That's validity. So you're not interested in anything else other than men and women representation in senior management position.
Okay. Okay.
So let's just take it further and say there's 200 senior management position let's say there's 200 senior management position in your company, right?
Yes, sir.
Which is what you are going to present as part of your literature. You then say there's 200 senior management positions in my company, and 120 or 150 of those are occupied by men. Then that leaves 50 of those occupied by women. That's less. Now, the difference between 150 and 50 demonstrate underrepresentation. You agree of one gender by the other.
Yes, sir.
So I'm saying that now you are measuring only that. You are measuring validity is really focusing on that, because once you start then raising other measurements.
Okay.
So that's what validity is all about. You said you're gonna do this, just do that. So it's like a target.
Okay.
What is your intention? Is to determine the relationship between your company and the employment of women in senior positions. Those are the things that you are focusing on. So anything that says senior position, you look at women, their recruitment strategies, their training capabilities of women, and how do they recruit them, and so forth and so on. So that's what you are focusing on. But once you start talking about men, transgender, other people, you're missing the boat. You are measuring something that you're not supposed to be measuring. So when you talk of validity, we look at whether the measure has accurately reflected or the measurement that you intended to measure. So when you go out and you say, I want to look at women and men, but I want to look at the reasons why women are underrepresented, you're surely going to design questions or interviews on the reasons why women are underrepresented, isn't it?
Yes, yes, sir.
So you're going to ask whoever that deals with, whoever has got the authority or the capability to bring women on board, to give reasons why they don't have as many women in senior positions as men. So your questions, and now when you start issuing questions, that becomes what? An instrument. So in other words, when you start interviewing us, you are now getting into the instrument, which is collection of data, which is why we were talking about the next measure, which is reliability. Because you need the instrument that is going to be reliable, and you're going to apply it consistently so that you are able to see whether you can get the same results. But what are the results? The result is to do with what you want to establish as reasons for the underrepresentation or the fact that there's less women in senior positions than men. Now, when you then compile your report, we want you to tell us why then is it that company X has got less women than men in senior positions. If there is a company that has got more women than men, you can actually compare that situation with that company. What are you doing now? You are basically having a comparative analysis. One company has got more women than the other, and the one has got less women, and you can then say, let's just establish why is it that company A has more whilst company B has less.
Okay. Okay.
Now,
Yeah,
please ask the question then on validity, so that we then, now that we have sort of just worked through the understanding of the possible problem you are investigating, How then do you understand validity in this context? Is it better now, or you still?
Yeah, no, it's better now. Better now.
Okay, how do you understand it, Edward? Sorry, I'm throwing it back to you again.
Because my assumption now, the validity is that now company X and the company A, after the comparable, now I found out that no, there's a validity in terms of company X, because the same thing is happening in company A.
No, that's different. We are saying if you go out and you measure the fact that women are underrepresented in your company, right?
Yeah.
If that's what you're going to do, the fact that that's what you're going to measure, and you come out and you have measured that, you have achieved validity.
Okay. Oh,
so
okay.
In other words, if you go out and you play and your intention is to win and all, that's all what you do, and you come back and you've won, that means there was validity. Your intention was nothing else but to go and measure this. So if you come out and you've measured that which you said you are going to measure, that's validity.
Okay. No, thanks. Okay.
So I was just taking it further to say,
okay.
if company A is underrepresented in terms of the women in senior position, and company B it's overrepresented, when you compare A and B, you can then establish reasons why A is overrepresented whilst B is underrepresented. That's comparative analysis. But when you measure that which you said you're going to measure, and you come back and you've measured exactly that, that's validity.
Okay. No, thanks.
Yeah, so validity is really just saying, I'm going out, this is what I'm going to do, and you come back, you've done that which you said you're going to do.
Okay, thanks.
And if you do that and you do it repeatedly and you get the same results, you are reaching what? Reliability. So you measure that and you measure it over and over, use the same instrument, getting the same results, then you are achieving reliability. And if you can do it and somebody else comes and they do it, they get the same results, it's replicability. So I'm able to reproduce. So I do exactly what you're doing, and I'm doing it the same way that you're doing it. You'd agree I should get the same result, isn't it?
Yes.
So if you give me this and you say, go out, this is what you're going to, let's just take a direction. If you drive between point A to point B, you're using a particular road, driving at a particular speed, considering the same kind of traffic consideration, traffic complications and whatever. And you tell me the speed, everything about it, I drive from A to B. I should arrive pretty much at the same time that you arrive at, because everything else considered is the same. You agree?
Yes,
okay, let's then just look at, so that's what validity is, and the difference with reliability is that more than that, reliability is about consistency, and replicability is about the ability to produce or to replicate that which the other researcher has done. Any other comment on this? We were repeating them just so that there is more understanding by those who did not want to ask questions at the time. But let's just check if there's anybody who wants to reflect on the three measurements.
Just what I can also ask is that, is there then a relationship between, when we're talking about validity on the instrument that you use, vis-a-vis what you want to measure in terms of obtaining validity? Is there, for example, how you collect your data, say use interviews or surveys, does that in any way has a relationship with validity of the study?
Yes, it does. there is a, remember, if you're going to measure that which you want to measure, you're going to use an instrument to measure that, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
So that instrument must be the right instrument to measure that which you want to measure. For instance, we know that there will be an instrument to measure, for example, liquid. So you need to use the instrument for liquid to measure liquid. Otherwise, the instrument that you're using could influence validity. Those are principles that we're going to talk to now on internal validity threats. Things that can, I mean, if you use a different instrument to measure, like for example, milliliters and so forth, you use the right instrument to measure the right phenomenon or whatever variable that you are measuring. Otherwise, yeah, instruments can influence validity. I hope it makes sense.
Okay, so am I correct then to say for validity is that I have used a thermometer to measure temperature, therefore I can achieve validity of that study, and then reliability would then say for every, if everything remains the same, the thermometer gives me the same results consistently.
Yes,
that
then
would be
that's
reliability.
Yeah. If you use the thermometer, what do you use the thermometer for? Let's say to measure temperature, right?
Yes.
So the instrument is thermometer. What are you measuring? You're measuring temperature. So if you apply a thermometer consistently to a temperature, you need to be able to establish the results. But the results may or may not be stable and consistent because temperature it fluctuates, right? But at least the instrument that you're using to measure the thermometer is consistent, right? It's the right instrument. You agree?
I agree.
Yeah. So it's important. I think that's a very good example we are using now. And that let's then use a thermometer to measure temperature. Although the temperature may fluctuate, but the instrument that you are using is correct. Now, when I test, I use thermometer, assuming that we are all on the same temperature all the time. When I apply the thermometer to a temperature, because the instrument is correct, and the temperature may, let's suppose the temperature is the same, and is the same over and over, is both validity and reliability. Now, when you give the thermometer to someone else, and everything being the same, that researcher is going to use the thermometer to measure temperature. That researcher must get the same results. As they get the same results, they are also achieving another principle measurement criteria, which is what? Reproducibility. Does it make sense?
It makes so much sense, Prof. Thanks for that.
Okay. I'm glad if we have now achieved that, because this is, to me, is the most complicated area that if we don't get it right, we may then lose the interest in research. Now let's look at internal validity. There is internal validity, there's external validity. So internal has to do with the extent to which the design and the data yield that yields will allow one to draw accurate conclusions about cause and effect and other relationship with the data. So in other words, if you then say you are sure that the reason why the temperature is the way that it is and having the thermometer, there's nothing else but because of the information or the data before you. So in other words, if you look at the cause and the effect, that it is because of this that this has resulted, and you've got no doubt in terms of that relationship, that's internal validity. So in other words, if you can establish the relationship between A and B, that the reason why A is behaving in the way that it does is because of B, you have achieved internal validity. I hope it makes sense. And for that to happen, you need to consider taking precautions and to eliminate other possible explanations for the research. So So for you to then say it is because of B behaves in the way that it behaves because of A, you must have eliminated any other possible explanations for it to reach internal validity. I hope it makes sense. So for you to say fire causes smoke, for example, the causal effect there is that we know for a fact that there is nothing else that causes smoke other than fire. So you have eliminated any other possible explanations that may be relevant for that purpose. So internal invalidity, which is what Bobby called them, refers to the possibility that the conclusions drawn from experimental results may not accurately reflect what has gone on in the experiment itself. So once there is doubt, and I like what normally happens in the legal fraternity, they always use the word beyond reasonable doubt. So internal validity is when you've got no other doubt other than say, I know for a fact that this is what is the result of that. So you are basically 100% certain that the conclusion that you are able to draw is as a result of the measurement that you've been following the experiment. So internal validity refers to whether a measurement process actually measures what it is intended to measure. That is whether a measurement lives up to its claims. So if you say you're going to measure the distance between A and B, and now you have come to a conclusion where you say, I know for a fact that the distance between A and B is X amount of, miles or kilometers. You are then sure that if anybody else was to measure that, they will come to the same kind of, distance and kilometers as per your measurement. Then you have achieved internal validity. So internal validity is the degree to which changes in the dependent variable are due to the independent variable rather than something else. So if I know that the reason why you are behaving the way that you are behaving, the last time we were using an example of nutrition and performance. Once we can establish that as a result of nutrition, your performance has improved and there's nothing else other than that, that's internal validity. You have achieved internal validity. It could well be that if we've got doubts that it is not only nutrition, but there are other factors that could have led to your performance improving other than just nutrition, then there is an internal invalidity. So in other words, there's a threat. There could be other reasons why you are performing as good as you are, and that may not necessarily, and is not necessarily as a result of nutrition. Once there is doubt, then we say it's an internal validity threat. So that's the reason why we say you eliminate other possible explanation. So we know for a fact that it's not because you were under pressure, there was stress, or you were feeling good, but it's because nutrition alone has improved your performance. So if we can establish the degree to which changes in the dependent variable are due to the independent variable, we have achieved internal validity. So changes in Y, in other words, changes in the dependent variable as measured may be attributable to X. Then we know that's internal validity. Nothing else but X. So nothing else by the independent variable that leads you to performing the way that you are performing. Then we have achieved internal validity. So internal validity threat, or what is also referred to as internal invalidity, are experimental procedures, treatments, or experiences of the participant that threaten the researcher's ability to draw conclusion or to draw correct inferences from the data about the population in an experiment. So once there are doubts that you can, to draw those inferences, then we're talking to internal invalidity, or what you call internal validity threats. So there are those internal validity threats that involve participants, such as the history, the maturation, the regression, selection, and mortality. These are some of the threats that can be considered in the participants. Let's just look at them quickly. History. History, in other words, I mean, just as an example, if somebody has studied, or you have now studied something 10, 20 years ago, and you do it today, it might not necessarily be similar in many respects. So an uncontrolled outside event occurring between two measurements of the dependent variable brings about change in the dependent variable. E.g., if, I mean, 10 years or 20 years ago, there was no state capture, for example. So a noteworthy event, the local community might change participants' knowledge, their abilities, or emotional states in ways. If you go to the Eastern Cape now, I mean, I'm just talking about things that are topical, and you talk about issues around alcohol and so forth, is noteworthy. The attitude, I mean, the participants that you're going to talk to today may have a different approach or answers or knowledge and abilities to alcohol as they would have previously. During the course of the experiment, historical events may occur that confound the experimental result. So when you talk to them today, due to history, they may actually have a different relationship with that which you are dealing with, because history, in terms of events, may influence how they deal with things today. So history can be an internal validity threat, because 10 years ago, people might have said things that 10 years later, they are not willing to, I mean, they are not saying the same thing due to history. I hope it makes sense. Maturation, for example, people continually grow and change. Such changes affect the result of the experiment. You yourself, I think you have now, your relationship with education might be different today than it was some years back. Because as you mature and as you grow, you change in the way that you look at things. So in a long-term experiment, the fact that the subject grow older can have an effect. I mean, the way in which you relate to the experiment today or to the research today might be different from how you probably related to it previously. So in shorter experiments, for example, people can grow tired, sleepy, bored, or hungry, or change in other ways that affect the behavior in the experiment. So your behavior, in some way or the other, does change as you mature. Testing is another internal validity threat. Often the process of testing and retesting influence people's behavior. Confounding the experimental result. Suppose I come to you today and I administer a questionnaire to a group, to you as a group, as a way of measuring prejudice. So as we administer an experimental stimulus and remeasure the prejudice by students, for example, by the time we conduct the post-test, because that will be pre-test before and then post-test, we come back, you may probably have become more sensitive to the issue of prejudice, and you will be more thoughtful in your answers. So in fact, you may have figured out that we're trying to find out how prejudiced you are, and because few people want to appear prejudiced, you may give answers that you think we are seeking. And of course, they will make you look good. So in a way, what we are saying here is, if you know that now you figured out what is it that you are measuring before and after, the pre-test and the post-test, because it may not necessarily look good that you are prejudiced in the way that you look at certain phenomenon. The next time when you look at it, you may then decide to give more of the answers that make the whole thing look good. So that's the internal validity threats. Once people figure out what the question is all about, they sometimes behave in the way that it's more suitable than what it actually meant to achieve. Instrumentation, we spoke about it just now. A change occurs in how a measurement instrument is used from one time to the next. For instance, a researcher might have one research assistant assistant rate participants' performance on the first occasion, but have a different research assistant who judge their performance on the subsequent occasion. So any observed change might be the result of the two assistants' differing standards for rating. You give the same thing to one research assistant, you get a different kind of result than with the other research assistant. It does happen. You submit your assignment to this one, you get same rating than the other. So instrumentation can also be an internal validity threat. So depending on who your research assistant is, the way in which they rate might be different from another research assistant. So it's a consideration when you look at internal validity. Remember, internal validity is about whether or not you've got no doubt that the measure is accurate, and if it's not accurate, it could be because of some of these reasons that we are presenting to you. Statistical regression is another internal validity threat that you should consider. Because in statistical regression, people who score extremely high or low on a measure at one time are likely to score in a less extremely manner on the same measure at the later time. That is, extreme scorers tend to drift toward more average performance during a subsequent measure. So they start very high and they come down to some kind of average. E.g., a researcher might assign people to one of two groups, such as high anxiety or low anxiety, based on the extremely high or low scores on a self-report questionnaire that is designed to measure general anxiety level. If the initially extreme scores were the result of people's temporary circumstances that might make them feel either exceptionally anxious or instead quite mellow on their first testing, the supposedly high anxiety people would become less anxious. So statistics will tell you that when you look at how you deal with your own life, you tend to be either on the high or on the low. But there's an understanding that if you were high, you're more likely to go average in your rating. Selection. We are all biased as researchers on how we go about selecting participants. So a bias exists in how members of different groups in a study are chosen. We all have that as researchers. So when recruiting, say for instance, college students for a study, a researcher might put all students enrolled in an 8 o'clock a.m. class in one treatment group and all students enrolled in 2 o'clock p.m. class in another treatment group. So students that are taking an early morning class might be different in some significant ways from those taking the afternoon class. So for instance, such considerations such as sleeping habits of the two groups might be different as you go, as you compare them with the afternoon class. So the issue of time here, those that are early or those that are late, is a consideration when you make conclusions on your research findings as to whether or not it has influenced your outcome or not. Attrition. Members of different groups drop out of the study at proportionally different rates. For instance, one group in a study might lose 25% of its members before the final measurement. So you start being 50, we end being 30. Whereas another group might lose only 5% of its members. So even in your group, sometimes you're going to have a lot, sometimes you're going to have less. We're going to have some dropouts, and sometimes you're going to have new people coming at any given stage. That influences the outcome of the study. Thus, even if the two groups were equivalent with regard to important characteristics at the beginning of the study, they might be different in some significant way later in the study, simply as a result of the differential dropout rate. So we all know when we all start, sometimes we start being 10 and we end up being whatever the number because of the dropout, which is will be at proportionally different rates. So there will be a dropout, which basically will affect how you'd like to interpret your research study. Demoralization. People do feel deprived with the control group as a result of the fact that you're giving something to one group and you're not giving something to another group. So in deprivation, this is to do with feelings of deprivation within the control group, which may result in some people giving up. So in educational experiments, for instance, control group subjects may feel the experimental group is being treated better, and they may then become demoralized. They will stop studying, they may act up or get angry because they compare themselves with that group that is receiving something and they are not receiving anything. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we are trying to do here, we are trying to explain the factors that are a threat to internal validity. What then is internal validity? We're saying is the extent to which the design and the data it yields will allow you as a researcher to draw accurate conclusion about cause and effect. So if you are unable to draw accurate conclusions about cause and effect, we look at what is it that I have done and I did not come to the same conclusion. So it could amount to history, it could be maturation, it could be testing, it could be instrumentation, it could be statistical regression, it could be selection, it could be attrition, it could be demoralization. So these are, so you don't simply just say, well, I have not achieved internal validity. In other words, I did not measure that which I wanted to measure. You look at what are the internal validity threats, which at the beginning of your study, you need to start controlling them and looking after them so that you eliminate them. Why do you have to eliminate them? In order for you to improve or enhance validity of your study. So that when you come to the conclusion, you are able then to say nothing else and nothing else, but I know that I've measured that which I wanted to measure. So I've taken care of all the threats to things that could influence my study. Are there any reflections or any inputs thus far before we take a different aspect of the work that we need to do? I know that it should be quite complicated now that we're talking about internal validity and the internal validity threats. Any comments, any input from any one of you?
So these threats, can they be factored in your measurement such that they no longer are threats, or is it something that is accepted to be threats and basically only the result will then tell whether they are affecting your study or not?
Yes, I'll try to, I don't want to answer it directly, but I'll try to explain the principle behind what you are saying. Is that yes, you become aware of them upfront, and you sort of develop in your instrumentation a plan to take care of them. So in other words, if you are going to study something that you studied 10 years ago, you factor in the fact that there could be the history over the decade may influence the way in which you're going to receive the data from the 10 year later. So in other words, it's almost like, if you like, when you do risk assessment and now you mitigate the risk. So you know that somebody who you studied at the primary level may actually behave differently at the secondary level. So how do you then build in a questionnaire that takes care of that? You become aware of it. So when you are aware of it, you can then document that as well, just so that you are aware of it and you're raising it as a consideration. It may or it may not necessarily affect your results substantially, but at least you note it. I mean, I'm just talking about history. As I was giving an example to say, if you were to talk to people about alcohol in and around the Eastern Cape now, their behavior and their attitude and their perception might be different than when you did that before the tragedy. So the tragedy must then be factored into your consideration, that because it may exaggerate how people are going to behave at a certain time. So that's just insofar as history is concerned. I hope I'm helping you there.
Yes, Prof.
So the other consideration could be, Numalo, for example, we spoke about selection. So again, when you are going to select people or participants, your own biasness as a researcher can be a factor. So you may actually take note of that and try to, as you manage it, as you reduce your biasness, you are increasing your validity. So every time you look after a threat and you are eliminating it, you are improving or enhancing the internal validity. So in other words, you creating an opportunity that we will all know that nothing else but only this results are credible for the purposes of what we are meant to measure. So basically it's just to assist you in your planning. Attrition, when you are building in an opportunity that there might be people who will drop out of your study at any given stage, you build it. How do you do it? Sometimes you just increase the sample size so that the size of the sample, even when people drop out, is not necessarily going to affect the outcome. So as you do something about it, you are actually building you are enhancing your validity, your internal validity of your study. Let's look at how would you want to improve, and I think that's what you're asking. How can I improve internal validity? It's important to do that. One way of doing that is that you can have a control lab study, and don't here when we talk lab, we mean in the when you interview people in their natural setting. It's not like your natural science lab. If you go talk to people where they're comfortable, it's more easier because then they relate to you better. So an experiment is conducted in a lab setting so that environmental conditions can be carefully regulated. When people are comfortable and they're in the space where they are comfortable, you're more likely to improve internal validity because they are not looking around, they're not worried and stressing about whether or not they will be marked or something like that, depending on what the nature of your study is all about. So another one is a double-blind experiment. Here, what it means is that you can have two or more different interventions that you can present with neither the participant in the study nor the people administering the intervention, knowing which intervention various participants are receiving. So, for example, you give some an intervention and you don't give others an intervention. So that we don't know what you are doing with the other group. Such lack of knowledge, that is the blindness, decrease the likelihood that people's expectation for outcome might influence the actual outcome. So if others don't know what you are doing with another group, so they are blind, they will not necessarily influence the actual outcome because they don't know what is happening on the other side. Unobtrusive measures. Here people are observed in such a way that they do not know their actions are being recorded. Now, it's a little bit an interesting one because you need to also work on ethical considerations there. But people tend to behave and do things naturally when they are not aware that they're being observed. Once they become aware that they're observed, then they change in the way that they behave. So in one case, a university library measures students and faculty use of different parts of the library by looking at two real-life examples to illustrate wear and tear patterns on the carpet. So when you know you are being observed, you tend to behave differently than when you are not being observed. So again, you can do observation in those kind of circumstances. Triangulation, this is the most popular one. In triangulation, here what it means is that you use multiple sources of data which are being collected with the hope that they will all converge to support a particular hypothesis or theory. Earlier on, I think, Sam, you were talking about using literature. if you are not going to triangulate it, in other words, if you are not going to use multiple sources, and the study might just be interesting to see how you arrive at conclusions. Here, really, it is very common in qualitative research, because what you can do literature review, and then you interview 1 or 2 people just to see whether or not they will corroborate the information that you collected. So, for instance, here a researcher might engage in many informal observation in the field and conduct an in-depth interviews, then look for common themes that appear in the data that you glean from both methods. So whatever methods that you'll be using, literature review, interviews, and so on. So this is more common in the mixed method design, in which you collect qualitative data to address a single research question. So triangulation is the most common one that is being used in a control lab, where you interview people in their natural setting as well. So this is this is amongst the strategies that you can use to improve, of course, internal validity. It's important to familiarize yourself with them, because once you know about the internal validity, the next thing is, what is it that you're going to do to improve the internal validity? To get to a point where you say, I know for a fact that the reasons of my finding in terms of causal relationship or whatever else that you're looking at is none other than you've been able to manage the internal validity. Now, we know of the internal validity. Now we need to look at external validity. External validity, unlike internal validity, here is the extent to which results apply to situations beyond the study itself. So if you can go beyond the study that you are looking at, then you are reaching external validity. I hope it makes sense. So you study a certain population and you get to a stage where you then say, I know for a fact that this is applying to to the population beyond the one that I'm studying. So the extent to which the conclusion drawn can be generalized to other contexts, it's external validity. So you're studying a group of 10 in a particular environment, and there's about 100 of those in that environment. I'm just making an example. And if the sample is so representative at the time, then you should be able to generalize to the entire population. So it is the extent to which the study's results can be generalized to a larger population or broader context. This concerns whether the apparent causal conclusion resulting from an experiment can be generalized beyond the experimental context. So basically, this is to do with generalization. External validity, also called extraneous variable, is the degree to which research findings can legitimately be generalized to other similar contexts. So you know that these results are applicable in other contexts because you have sampled your selection in a representative way. So this is done by representativeness of the participants and the measures used in the research. So if you have a representativeness of the participants, you are more than welcome to generalize to other contexts that are similar. They must be similar. So extraneous factors which influence the outcome of the study and confound interpretation of the results. It refers to the possibility that conclusions drawn from the experimental research may not be generalizable to the other or to the real world. So when we look at external validity, it's just about the population, the extent to which you can generalize the research results. So the difference with internal validity is that it also has external validity. The other one is the extent to which you measure that which you needed to measure. The second, external validity, is the extent to which you can generalize the result to the other contexts that are similar in the broader population. So external validity threats arise when the experimenter draws incorrect inferences from the sample data, to other persons, other settings, and past or future situations. So you need to be able to define for yourself what is your external validity threat in your case, so that when you draw inferences, you look at what was my sample data to the extent that it represents the broader population. So an external validity threat is population validity, which talks to the degree to which the findings obtained for a sample may be generalized to the total population to which the research hypothesis apply. So in other words, if you have not sampled your sample from a representativeness principle, you will not be in a position to generalize. So that's population validity. Ecological validity, on the other hand, is to do with the degree to which they may be generalized to all circumstances that are implied by the research hypothesis. So when you look at the ecological validity, it's not only insofar as the earlier point we raised on similar context, but more to do with all circumstances that are implied by the research hypothesis. If you want for example, in the vaccine days, you want a situation where Johnson & Johnson or whatever else that we are testing to be applied in different circumstances, then you need to make sure that you've got all those ecological factors considered in your study. So there are practical tips for proposal writers to address validity issues that you can, is just a take-home message. One is that you need to identify the potential threats to validity that may arise in your study early in your work. You identify them. You need to have a separate section in a proposal that may be composed to advance this threat. So in other words, you identify the threats and you come up with a plan to look at those threats. You define exact type of threat and what potential issues it prevents to your study. You discuss how you plan to address the threat in the design of your experiment, so you are aware of it, and you explain how are you going to address the threat, and that you do in your plan of your research. You cite references to books that discuss the issue of threats to validity. So you can also go and read a little bit more on the issue of threats to validity, just so that you've got a better understanding and a plan to address them. Ladies and gentlemen, this basically then concludes our discussion on internal validity and external validity. But before we close the whole thing, I thought, like we have in the internal validity, we can also talk about how you can improve external validity. One is a real life setting where you use a lab experiment to help control the environment and conditions where a study takes place. For instance, laboratory studies have a downside. They provide an artificial setting. So if you start people in an artificial setting, that might be quite different from the real life circumstances. Research that is conducted in the outside world, although it may not have the tight control of a lab, they may be more valid in the sense that it yields results from broader applicability to other real-world contexts. A representative sample, we spoke about it, we can't overemphasize it. Replication in a different context. Here, what it means is that if one researcher draws a conclusion from a particular study in a particular or specific context, and another researcher who conducts a similar study in a very different context reaches the same conclusion, and perhaps additional researcher also conducts similar studies in dissimilar contexts, again draw the same conclusion. That's the replication. That's that replicability measurement we were talking about. So taken together, these studies provide evidence that the conclusion has validity and applicability across diverse situations. So it's important to understand your population, and important to know how you're going to sample your population. Because if you sample your population and you measure with them, you deal with them with what you want to deal with, you are dealing with internal validity. Then the population, if you can then understand the total population, because you have sampled correctly, representative way, you should then be in a position to make conclusions that are more applicable to that population in the context of external validity. Otherwise, if you don't do any of those, you will have internal validity threat on your research and external validity threats on your research as part of the consideration. None of these things means your research is wrong. It's just for you to understand what those factors are as you deal with them. Thank you very much. Let me then, before we wrap up, just check if there are questions from your side. Are there questions from your side, or we still good to go? Because what I thought we can do quickly in whatever is left is just to say, in order for you to control variables, you have to keep some of these things very constant. Because if you're dealing with something that is constant, such as, for instance, age, gender, grade level, or socioeconomic status, and things are not changing all the time, you're more likely to improve on your validity. Include a control group. A control group is that group that you use in comparison to the experimental group. So you give the group something and you look at the one that is not receiving anything and you compare the two. Randomly assign people to groups. When you do the random assigning of people to groups, in other words, that random selection, you are more likely to control the variables, because random selection has to do with that probability that you use when you do sampling in your population. But I actually want to conclude before I take comments from all of you. I want to say today what we're really looking at is a plan, which is a research design, a methodology, which is the technique, internal validity or just validity, which has got both internal and external, which is the extent to which the measure that which you meant to measure as a researcher, and the threats to validity like your history, your maturation, your selection, your demoralization and stuff, and external validity, which is the extent to which the results are generalizable to the broader population, which has got, population validity and ecological validity, the extent to which things can apply to all circumstances beyond the population that you are studying is very important. So I just thought that because there's just too much information, maybe we're going to have to pause somewhere. And this is where I want us to pause quickly.